All right. We're live. We are live here with This is Revolution live stream. I'm here with professor, author, public intellectual, Packer fan.
Yes.
Are you a season ticket holder before all this happened?
No. We had half a season for a while because of through family. My wife's family, had not her family, but a family in Green Bay she knew. But this year, I mean, we're locked out anyhow. But if there were stadium games, I'd probably get to maybe 2 because my dentist is the team dentist. Well, we're only a city of, I don't know if you realize, we're only a city of 100,000. Well, you've been here. We're only a city. It's not even a city. I mean, seriously speaking.
It's like a town.
It's a big town is what it is. That's right.
With a stadium in the middle of it. You
gotta admit that it's kind of surreal when I first came to Green Bay that here's this big town with a huge team. I mean, huge team. And people here, and I used to joke with people, I said, you guys don't even realize how unique this situation is.
Yeah, because, we're talking, and I do music, and I've driven through the U.S. I honestly, and I'm not even trying to over-exaggerate, I don't know how many times I've driven through the U.S. because I've done it so much. And there's something about coming to cities where they have like a thriving team, or there's a stadium in the center of town, like Cincinnati. Like once you hit Cincinnati, you see that big ass football stadium and the big ass baseball stadium. Seattle actually is kind of the same way. I don't like Seattle.
We'll have an anti-fan club there.
And I saw that you were a Packer fan when you were saying something good about Aaron Rodgers, and I think I asked you like a plethora of football questions, kind of just to change the. Every time, so I follow Professor Kaye on Twitter, and you are active. You are active as hell on Twitter.
Too active, yeah.
And so when he says stuff, sometimes there's a lot of people that chime in with they're gonna like show how smart they are with their response. And he finally had a football response or football tweet, and nobody say shit. So I was like, oh, how do you feel about the Packers' chances this year? And what about the I kind of like went off on a tangent to mess with you a little bit.
No, I mean, seriously speaking, for anyone's a football fan, and I can tell you
some football fans.
Rodgers looks phenomenal right now because he looks so relaxed and so unperturbed. And when you've got a running back like Aaron Jones and a receiver like Devontae Adams, I mean, it's not quite the Favre time when we went to the Super Bowl, okay? But it is the kind of time where you could imagine we had a 13-3 record last year, and Aaron never looked terribly relaxed. So maybe this year, bigger things will happen.
I watched the highlights. I didn't watch those games, and where they went 42-24.
Well, it was 43-21, 34, was it?
That was like that was week 1. They doubled up the line.
I think we had 85 points in the first 2 games.
Yeah. That's the real. I mean, I know the Lions don't have the defense that maybe the Bears have, but
the Detroit Lions, no matter who's coaching, no matter what year it is, they are without a doubt the filthiest team around. Their performance is it's just filthy. I know I'm going to alienate Detroit people. Look, I've always felt bad for Detroit Lions. I really have. They have nice colors, the uniform. They have
Barry Sanders.
Well, wait. Yes, they've had exactly. Stafford for a while was the highest paid player in the NFL, and there were times where I started actually truly feeling sorry for him, and then I thought, no, they had that guy Sue. They've got people now who just literally are doing just awful things. So that's such a shame, really a shame. But let me make it clear: I'm a Packers fan, but I'm not fond at all of the NFL. That's the thing. I mean, there's not much.
That's the complicated thing about us being sports fans, right? Like the league, I have been watching football since I was like 7 or 8. Like really watching it and following players and reading the newspaper just so I could see the stats. listening to it on the radio.
Oh, that's
like
that's like listening to tennis on the radio.
I watch listen to all sports.
You can't look if you're in the car. You've got to do it. I mean, but
like when I was a kid, we didn't get baseball games on TV every day.
Oh,
so it was like you had to listen to the Giants on the radio.
Yeah,
and I listened to the Giants on the radio. The Warriors didn't come on every day. That's a new phenomenon.
Well, my only real sport is football. I don't get excited by other sports, but I'm a huge LSU fan as well.
Oh, sorry.
I did my PhD at LSU.
That explains a lot.
Yeah.
I worked in the Gulf of Mexico for a while, cooking on oil rigs. Yes, off the coast of Louisiana.
Yeah.
So I definitely have a fondness for Louisiana. Do not have the fondness for SEC football.
Okay.
That's California in me.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me put it this way. I grew up despising California.
Oh.
Because that's where the Dodgers went.
I
was only 8 years. I mean, I was like 8 years old, and teams aren't supposed to. Remember, this is 1957, whatever it was, and a team is taken out of Brooklyn. My family was a Brooklyn family. That was devastating.
And then that history is kind of a nasty history. If you know the history of how they displaced all the Latin families that lived in where the Dodgers play now.
Chavez Ravine.
Yeah. So that's kind of a gnarly history.
Well, that's actually, and I was telling you before we started, that's actually how I ended up a Packers fan as a 10-year-old, because when my father took me to a football game at Yankee Stadium, and first of all, he was a Packers fan himself, but that's not the point. The point was that when he took me, I hated the Yankees so much that any team that played in Yankee Stadium, I hated as well. And that was the New York Giants football team. And that game was the Packers and the Giants. And, it was just natural. And then there was a New York Times sports columnist about, 20, 30 years ago, had a great piece. It was entitled, "Socialism is Alive and Well in Green Bay, Wisconsin." Because
about the ownership,
we're a fan-owned team. There is no private ownership. It's not it's a profit-making enterprise, but there's no one who receives monies from the profits. What's not paid out is recycled into the team and into the community.
It is recycled in the community. I always wondered if it went back into the community.
Yeah, there's a Packers Foundation that monies are given out to community groups. Yeah. There's no owner. There's a president and a board, but no family owns the Packers in the way other cities do that.
Like the Davis family owns the Raiders and moved them to Oakland or into Las Vegas.
Yeah,
which is just. I'm not a Raiders fan at all.
Yeah,
but that man. That and then the Warriors moving has really decimated. I was before we got on, I was on a radio show here locally because of where I worked with one of the emergency homeless shelters in Oakland. And I had wrote this kind of long thing about it. And it just decimated that whole area. And the Oakland Stadium strategically is actually one of the best placed sports stadiums probably in the country.
Oh, no, it's a shame that really is.
But I mean, I was never a Raider fan, so part of me is like, eh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel for cities like San Diego. St. Louis has the Cards, so they're what do they care?
But still, that's
the Blues. I mean,
the Blues aren't. I mean, I don't know the last time you've been to St. Louis, but that's not like.
I go to St. Louis. Well, we used to before the pandemic. We went a lot. We have a daughter who lives down there, my grandson and my son-in-law. So we go.
St. Louis.
I like St. Louis.
It's one of those cities to me that's like. I like the architecture of a lot of the stuff down there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting architectural, right. Absolutely.
But it's also kind of one of those cities where there's a lot of stuff had left. I know stuff is coming back.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, I mean, the race question in St. Louis just really was, but
I mean, that's all over the place.
But it is coming back, and I know some people there, some political people. So
They're trying to do some good things.
oh
So
yeah, definitely.
I have a list of things to ask you.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't think we'd spend the hour talking sports tonight. So
so you didn't think be ready to talk a
ah,
lot of things you're not ready to talk about
okay.
within the
But
realm of what you like. I'm not going to quiz you on shit you
yeah,
don't know.
also keep in mind that my knowledge is limited like anybody's. So, but not about maybe history and politics.
No, okay. So first of all, I discovered you on the late great Michael Brooks show a few years ago.
Uh huh. Right.
He said
Yeah.
he was kind of hyping it up that there was going to be a gentleman on there, and I see this cat on there with the ball cap and just firing off facts. And I think I don't know what the first show you were on was
Well, we
about.
did the first thing we might have talked could have been it was either Thomas
FDR,
Paine or FDR
yeah.
or it could have been about the 1970s and the declaration of class war by capital versus working people.
Maybe that was it. I don't remember
Yeah.
off the top of my
I never
head.
quite knew exactly what Michael and I were going to do. The deal, not the deal, the rate. I mean, Michael and I were just really close. So whenever I would be in New York,
Hmm.
and our other daughter lives in Brooklyn, which
Hmm.
is where the studios are for Majority Report that Michael used,
Hmm.
and he worked with Sam Cedar. The understanding we had is if I'm in New York, I'm on the show. So I
Hmm.
used to actually tell him I'm gonna actually do what I previously didn't do. Instead of going to New York like Thursday to Sunday,
Hmm.
I would go to New York, say Friday to Wednesday morning.
Hmm.
That way I could be sure to be there for Tuesday night
And
so
do the
that he and I
show.
could do the show. Yeah.
No, those were fun shows, and it definitely took me down a rabbit hole of more of your stuff. And I got to see you on other shows. Zero Hour. There's a
Oh
great
yeah.
episode
Sure.
with you on Zero Hour. And one thing that I really like is that you have a very honest approach, but there's also hope in it.
Yeah. I can't, I actually, one of my concerns about the left for many years has been that instead of the left recognizing the power in history, in fact, I
Hmm.
once did a book called The Powers of the Past, in which I was showing how Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, and Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, and their New Right movement literally sort of laid claim to British and American history.
Hmm.
And ever since then, the right wing has laid claim to American history in a very, very unreal kind of way, okay, a kind of simplified patriotic fashion.
Hmm.
But what the left has done for so many years, instead of responding by literally going back and, as the title of my most recent book, one of my most recent books, taking hold of American
Yes.
history, to remind ourselves of the fact that when when America was made better, or if you prefer, greater, not great, but greater than it had been, that it usually involved radical struggles of radical figures and popular movements from below. In fact, I this Make America Radical Again, what is both about the American radical tradition that we should literally lay claim to because it's the story of America, but
Hmm.
also we should never forget, and this is to me maybe the really important thing ultimately, is that whenever whenever Americans have faced mortal crises, I mean, look, we know this, we know all the better today, and by no means have we transcended it. The stories of exploitation, oppression,
Hmm. Hmm.
injustice, and persecution. We know that, and we should never forget it, and we should never fail to remember it, and indeed to recount it. But it's also the case that at times of mortal crisis, 1770s, the American Revolution, the 1860s, the Civil War years, the 1930s, the Great Depression, the worst economic and social catastrophe in American history, and then followed by the war against fascism, that Americans found it in themselves, for all of their faults and failings and the divisions, and however much folks were literally marginalized. The fact is that somehow they got it in themselves to transcend the crisis, to beat their enemies, to literally rise up and make America radical. The way they survived was by going radical, so that, the 1770s witnessed the foundation of the makings of a democratic republic. The 1860s witnessed the achievement of defeating the Confederacy by ending slavery. Okay. And in 1930s, empowering working people. And the more important point about that is that did not happen from the top down. Okay. In the American Revolution, in the Civil War, in the Great Depression, and the New Deal, these were popular struggles that actually pushed political leaders to go even further than they themselves would ever have gone. So, this is the kind of thing. And when I think about that, it prevents me from losing hope. It prevents me from becoming cynical. And I'll just say my hero ever since I was 10 years old, not only the Packers, but was Thomas Paine. And Paine, in his pamphlet Common Sense, and I guess if people can see what we're doing, I'll just hold up. It's this little 47-page pamphlet, Common Sense. And he has some great lines in there. We're still connected, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I can hear you. You can see yourself. I changed the screen.
Yeah, I see myself. I don't see you. But so he wrote, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again," which was probably the most revolutionary line in modern world history. In some ways, it is the foundation of modern history. If you think of modern history as a radical break from all the eras of the past. And I'll also note that I've discovered this after I wrote my first book on Thomas Paine, so it's not in there. But Martin Luther King Jr., in the late 60s, before his assassination in 68, when he was really worried, he went through periods of real despondency because having gotten the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, achieved, the fact was that he went north and discovered the depth of racism in the north.
In Chicago, yeah.
Yeah, and then he also he knew damn well, but he also realized the degree to which the struggle for equality, which he had always been a part of, was also going to be a struggle for the rights of working people. And obviously, in the case of Memphis, decidedly, Black sanitation workers, those who suffered the inequality the most. But he says in one of his writings, one of his books, which I've got somewhere over my shoulder here, that the line that sort of restores him, or at least lifts his spirits, is Thomas Paine's line, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." And the recognition of that is a very powerful insight, because it's, in one sense, it's fundamentally false. You can never fully start the world over because we all have memories. But it's also fundamentally true, because the point is that history, politics, and society, and the economy, the entire social and political order, are ours. We've made them, we suffer them, and it's our task to either endure them or transform them. Okay.
Thomas Paine said, "These are times that try men's souls."
Right.
Are these those times that we're in right now, or is that a little bit of an over-exaggeration?
No, I got to tell you that it's. I've said to people, I said, how many years am I going to have to keep repeating Thomas Paine's words? These are the times that try men's souls. But I will tell you, and I'm 70 years old now, and I think that for all of the craziness and all the horrors that have taken place in the world in the course of my lifetime, that at least in terms of American political life, in light of all the things we had accomplished, we thought, in the 60s, that we now are in a time which is more threatening to American democratic possibilities than ever. But we also know that there was every reason to believe that, yeah, we have it in our power to transform America. Right now we're facing an election which literally democracy seems to hang in the balance. But a very fundamental thing we should not forget is that the rising this summer, the taking of the streets this summer was incredibly revealing of just how much we've transcended of the American past. Those are the most diverse groups of young people I think we've ever seen maybe outside of a music concert or whatever. In fact, even music concerts.
They're not very diverse.
Music concerts are often these days,
I got some bad news for you. They're not as diverse as we'd like them to be. But no.
That's true.
I agree with you. No, I agree with you.
Sort of correcting myself.
No, I agree with you.
But it really is the case that what I saw in the streets, and I wasn't there in the streets. Green Bay, Wisconsin didn't witness that kind of stuff. But it's also the case that at 70 years of age, I'm a little hesitant from going out into large crowds these days.
In the COVID suit.
I mean, yeah, and I can tell you that Wisconsin has been spiking regularly. The county I live in has a higher rate right now of cases than any other part of the state. And down the street from where I live, where there's a meatpacking plant, which for a while was a hot spot in the city. So, you can imagine my reservations about going beyond the neighborhood or or running into the store to pick up stuff. Yeah. But to come back to my point is that those are incredibly impressive moments this past summer, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of the SOBs of the Trump administration and the police of all too many cities. I mean, that was impressive. And I can only hope that out of that, we're able to find ourselves in new forms of solidarity. Okay, that's the thing.
So I had Professor Cedric Johnson on a few months ago. During the summer when this was all jumping off.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, because it was jumping off, so it was a fresh conversation. And I asked him if he felt that a lot of what we were seeing was Trump inspired. Because we had Ferguson in 2014, which was pretty brutal. We had Trayvon Martin in 2012.
Yeah. Yes.
And here in Oakland, there's a whole movie made about it. A young man named Oscar Grant, they got murdered at our subway system, the BART system. And the protests always ring out, but they seem very regional. And to your point, I think this is the first time we saw something be global. They were protesting all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Global.
Was that the reaction, in your opinion, to what do they call it, proto-fascism starting to run amok globally?
Well, okay. Let's put it this way, and let me put it as I am known as a historian. I'll put it into even a larger historical context so we can take it apart. For a start, we have witnessed for 45 years. I remember saying this when it was 25 years and 30 years and then 35, 45 years and more. It was essentially a declared class war by the powers that be, the corporate elite and their conservative and what later came to be known as neoliberal allies. A declaration of war was essentially offered in the early to mid 70s against, they actually, in what was called the Crisis of Democracy Report, which was a report commissioned by the Trilateral Commission, which was an association of political and economic elites of Western Europe, the United States, and Japan, underwritten fundamentally by David Rockefeller of the Rockefeller Brothers, authored by three major figures, most especially the American political scientist, professor of government at Harvard, Samuel Huntington. Okay, and in this Crisis of Democracy report, they said there's too much democracy. We are suffering. We, as if we, meaning the elites, we're suffering an excess of democracy. And they named the threats, the folks who needed to be tamed, you might say. And this included public employees and the labor movement. Okay. I think they might have used the term minorities, but we know they meant African Americans and Latinos. Okay. The women's movement, the consumer movement, the environmental movement, and young people.
When you say consumer, do you mean like kind of the Ralph Nader consumer?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Ralph Nader, exactly. Okay. Not the sort of Consumer Reports magazine type stuff.
Not consumerism, and we must stop.
Right, but the campaigns against the corporations that were producing cars that were unsafe at any speed, you might say, drug companies that were not reporting the dangers of those drugs. They were the thalidomide babies of the 1960s. I mean, and then also, and this is the other thing, they said, not to mention, they had to figure out a way to tame the liberal media. Mm-hmm. And then, last but not least, what they called value-oriented intellectuals, and by which they meant humanities and social science professors, meaning, historians and literature people and sociologists and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, they declared war. I mean, this was, by the way, the report was issued by the commission and published by NYU Press. This was no kind of like conspiracy theory kind of stuff. This was straight out in the open.
We're letting you know.
We're letting, exactly. And the business CEOs and COOs organized new groups. They already had their Chamber of Commerce. They now created the Business Roundtable and groups like that. And these groups, you could only belong if you were a CEO or COO, and you had to promise that you yourself would fly, presumably on your own corporate jet, to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress yourself. In other words, so that if an issue came up, like a Consumer Product Safety Commission, labor law reform, anything that implied empowering people against capital, the big corporations, these folks could fly into D.C. You'd have the lineup of jets out of Dulles Airport. I think, I call it Dulles. What is it called? No, and then also anymore? Reagan, the old National
Reagan,
Airport, they renamed Reagan. And their job was to lobby, to say, no, you can't do this. And if a corporate executive at that level, CEO or COO, comes into your office, what he's saying is, if you want me to donate to your campaign next time, you're not going to do this. I mean, that's like a personal kind of appearance represents a threat. Okay. So in the 70s, we begin this class war against the rights of working people that had been won between the 1930s and the 1960s, the rights of women, meaning their capacity to control their own bodies, the rights of people of color, especially African Americans, because we're talking civil rights and voting rights. Though civil rights was by no means limited. It included equal rights for women. It included equal rights to whatever your faith, your religious faith. I mean, it was a universal. But it was the case that this class war from above was a war essentially on the democratic achievements from the 1930s through the 1960s. And if you think about that over the course of time, think about how effective that has been. The Voting Rights Act has been essentially ripped up, in the sense that no longer does the federal government have to give it permission to counties if there are going to be any change.
We're seeing voter suppression. I mean, Florida is a great example. Georgia is a great example.
Most people don't realize the voter suppression has occurred everywhere in the sense that even in Wisconsin, voter suppression.
I did a whole show actually about Wisconsin and the vote that came up earlier this year for the state.
You go back to 2000. Go back to 2000 when Scott Walker became governor, and the Republicans controlled the legislature, and all of a sudden, took away labor's rights.
I was there.
Okay, well,
I was in Madison,
and people don't realize that when they enact voter ID laws, this is really curious. Which, by the way, back in the 70s, if you ever mentioned any idea of a national voter ID or whatever else, the Republicans would have been the first to say, don't you dare, they would have gone into their libertarian mode. Now it's the Republicans over and over again who are demanding that there be some kind of ID to vote. Now, what does that do? It not only makes it difficult for poor people and the elderly, folks who don't have driver's license, is to have the kind of ID. It also makes it difficult, this kind of thing, for students who are not resident where their license indicates their residence. They're in dorms at various parts of the state. So fortunately, students were given the capacity to show student IDs as evidence because they're state-issued IDs. But these were efforts to suppress the turnout of the very people who the Republicans expected to vote against them. So this is all part of that class war from above. And what the class war really is, it's a war against democracy, against the rights and powers of the people. So we've had this all the way along. So now the racial injustices were blatant. I mean, it's not like stories out of the South of the past, which were just awful. Mm-hmm. Now, it's like they happen in Wisconsin, they happen in Minnesota, and young people who have in many cases transcended anything my generation knew of integration. Okay, they're already threatened by the powers that be in the sense of their futures, their immediate futures. I mean, student debt during the time I've been a professor these last 40 years has just skyrocketed.
Well, it also went from being something that was at public universities that was free to something that now costs an arm and a leg.
Right. California, as a prime example. That's right. Wisconsin had very low tuition. And I can tell you, when I came to the state of Wisconsin, my students were all working at the same time they were in school because my student body was essentially often first-generation college students. But they didn't go into debt. The idea of debt, and then what happened? So there used to be what they called a one-third rule in Wisconsin, so that the cost of higher education would be covered one-third by citizens' taxes, one-third by gifts and grants to the university system, and third by student tuition. So one-third of the cost. That might be as bad now as 50% the students have to pay towards their education, because as working people's wages were basically static for these past 45 years, right? Mm-hmm. It means that their wallet did not keep up with the cost of living, which meant if Republican legislators said, vote for me because I'm going to lower your taxes, you say to yourself, well, my wages aren't going up. The only way I can make things, viable is if I vote to lower my taxes. And of course, working people never see the reduction of taxes that the rich see. Mm-hmm. But what it means is if the tax base is going down, something's got to give, right? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden the fees on services have to go up. And what's a primary service? Higher education. Public education is covered by property taxes, but not higher education. So the fact is that students were going to have to pay more and more, but most people don't see the connections. Either they're too young to know the story, or they're too caught up in trying to survive to quite see all the connections that are there.
I grew up. I'm 43, so I definitely grew up in the 80s. And as we were talking earlier, I listened to. There was no sports talk radio. It was the game came on a radio station. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So after the game, I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I listened to right-wing talk show hosts, and that's who was on. There was no voice of the left. I don't even know if there is one now.
Once upon a time, just so you know, Jason. Once upon a time, there were labor radio stations. There were progressive radio stations in numbers. There were lots of shows, but in the course of the 80s and then the 90s, okay, this Rush Limbaugh is a prime example, especially I guess in the 90s. Folks like that literally were driven. They drove off the progressives because people were getting so angry because of the things I was just talking about that they were turning to these kinds of people to sort of feed their anger. They wanted to join And
that's what I wanted to get at, because I really feel like the Rush Limbaughs of the world, coupled with the Reagan administration, and maybe the failures of Carter, and then put on top of that Watergate. I feel like that's when, and this is just my opinion.
You just laid it out in reverse order. So Watergate, Carter, Reagan.
Yeah. I feel like all those things made people say big time, I don't trust the government. And I guess you can throw on top of that, there was no real positive spin on Vietnam, right? So now you have this horrible war. You got this scandalous president. The peanut farmer didn't do it, but Reagan's going to come in and literally ran on "Make America Great Again."
Yeah, those were his words. In fact, right? People should be calling, before they ever call him a liar, they should have said he's a plagiarist a liar and a cheat, something like that.
That's that Roger Stone, right? Wasn't Roger
Yeah.
Stone a part of that campaign too?
Oh, and by the way, just so we make sure we get the story full scheme. If we go from the 70s to the 80s of Reagan, then we go to the 90s, and we have, Carter was, by the way, to my mind, one of the worst presidents that ever lived. Okay, I just want to go on record saying
more than Millard Fillmore.
Yeah, I don't even think about Millard Fillmore. No, Carter was truly abysmal. Carter paved the way to Reagan.
Yeah,
he was the one who talked about austerity first. Carter, he's the one who deregulated finance to begin with. He
turned down your
deregulated the
thermostat.
transportation industry. He turned his back on the labor movement, the environment. He had turned his back on every movement you can imagine. Okay, during the late 80s. So not 80s, late 70s.
Late 70s, yeah.
So wait, but so then we get Reagan. Okay, morning in America, you might say, as he said. But then the 90s, we have another truly abysmal presidency of Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, truly abysmal presidency.
8 years.
You've got everything from NAFTA,
mm-hmm.
Which was a Republican ambition that he gets enacted with the Democrats. Okay, turned his back on labor and the environment. Then and you've got the mass incarceration. You've got the utter failure to produce health care that Americans were convinced they were finally going to be getting.
Which he ran on.
You bet. Big time he ran on it. And then what did he do? He created a secret commission headed by his wife, Hillary Clinton, and they blew national health care for more than a generation, you might say. In fact, we don't even have it now, so it's a couple of generations almost. And then, on top of that, he ends what they used to call welfare as we know it. Okay. Oh,
he did.
Right?
Went in there. 70 million families he kicked off.
Yeah, and all I know is I had students who were on, what's it called, aid to families with dependent children, who were no longer going to be able to stay in university and get, they would have to go out and get, minimalist jobs. But then throw on top of that the fact late in his presidency, they literally bring an end to what was called the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which was, most people don't realize, Roosevelt solved the banking question by enacting with the Democratic Congress a law that literally said that you could not combine investment banking and commercial banking. Mm-hmm. So that you really weren't going to place everybody's savings accounts in jeopardy by way of risky investments. Right? Mm-hmm. And then under Clinton with, the likes of
Greenspan.
Was that?
Oh, as I said, Greenspan.
No, Rubin. I forget his first name, and also Summers.
Larry Summers. Yeah,
Larry Summers. They pursue a Republican idea, literally pushed by Phil Graham, conservative Texas senator, and they signed what is it called, the Graham-Rudman Act. I think was the one that overrode I may have got the wrong one, but it overrode the Glass-Steagall, and thus commercial banking and investment banking are now going to be possible under one roof. Mm-hmm. And that eventually paves the way to the
mortgage crisis of 2008,
9, 10, and the Great Recession that even now we've never really fully recovered from it, because people who had good jobs lost the good jobs and ended up in barely minimum wage or poorly paid, service sector jobs.
I'm one of those people.
There you go.
I made a mint during that time and lost it all when the market crashed and lost houses and cars and the whole nine. So
then we get the Bush administration of 8 years, which begins the process of reducing taxes for the wealthy, right? And then we get the Obama years, which turned out to be another set of neoliberal policies. Unfortunately, the Republicans hated Obama so much that even when he was willing to literally put everything on the table, they weren't willing to give him a deal because they hated him so much.
So I want to ask you about that, because there's a lot of amnesia going on right now in the political sphere of just regular people.
Yes.
I'm not talking higher education where you are. I'm talking just regular folk. And Obama was made out to be this working class hero, and people kind of forget that that's Harvard Law Review. Like that's
Right.
That's not
Yeah.
regular. You know, he comes from a single parent household, but it ain't like it wasn't like my single parent household. You know, his daddy didn't leave because he got shipped off to
he was
prison. He
raised
went
in
to
and his
Harvard.
grandparents were no, exactly. His own, his parents split up, but his father split up to go to Harvard, and his mother,
Yeah, or they met at Harvard, or basically
like
it was a lot of high education going on in the
right.
in the Obama household.
Yeah.
That being said, a lot of the things that I see going on in my community today started during the Obama administration. When I say that, I mean like homelessness on another level. I mean issues with joblessness. Definitely, I started to see it really bad 2012. 2012, because there's a lot of things that happened. 2010.
Yeah, actually,
Go ahead.
as long as you're in California, the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you a story because I'm going to only make a slight correction to when it all begins, and as you can see it, my very first time in the Bay Area was, I think it was 1992. Yeah, 92, 93.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in the Bay Area, both in San Francisco, Berkeley, and then down towards Palo Alto. I was giving a talk at Stanford.
I was going to ask if you were giving a talk.
Yeah, I was at a conference in San Francisco. My friend said, "Oh, we got to get you out to Berkeley." We went out there, and I was shocked at the homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
But that was to me very telling that this homelessness had begun far earlier than the.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this goes back. It was a consequence of the Reagan years, honestly. It may even go back into the Carter years. But I remember growing up, you didn't see homelessness in New York. I mean, it was rare on the scale that I saw in San Francisco. You didn't see it here in Green Bay as much because it's just damn too. I mean, people headed to
they'll freeze.
Like California. Yeah, exactly. and there is homelessness. Don't get me wrong. And there were churches that then opened their doors to keep people off the streets. But that's only when it got truly bad that we saw that coming to Green Bay. So, but anyhow, but you continue. I mean, yeah, I mean, all the things we're talking about. To me, it was un-American to see that and I grew up in the New York area.
It was always bad in San Francisco ever since I've been a kid. Ever since I've been going to San Francisco.
You're only 43. Go back 43 years ago.
I'm talking about like going. I've been going to the city since I was like 14. So yeah, 90, 91.
Yeah. So I mean, that's
It's looked like it hasn't looked like it looks now.
Is it
now
worse
it's
now?
even. Oh God, yeah. Oh,
that's pretty hurt.
God,
I can't even begin to imagine it then, because what I saw in 92, 93 in San Francisco, every sort of, what do they call it? A door front to an apartment building.
Yeah, somebody sleeping in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's. I couldn't tell you what that history is. I did have a guy on the show actually just recently who works in the Tenderloin, a gentleman named Randy Shaw. He wrote a book called Generation Priced Out a couple of years ago that talks a lot about gentrification in San Francisco. And we talked a little bit about San Francisco and Oakland and laws and building affordable housing. And there's a lot that goes into affordable housing in California that we could do a whole 2-hour show about. And it would get people so enraged when you hear why it's difficult. The LA Times wrote a great piece about it.
Yeah, LA, I understand, is the homelessness is just nightmarish.
I think they're number one, excuse me, in the world on their Skid Row.
Yeah, I know Pete, a really, really good friend of mine who maybe you should meet sometime or even talk to, Joe Sandberg, who's very much an active Democrat. And I mean, he just tells me that somebody needs to create a real political movement. I mean, I know it's already emerged around that question in LA. It's just
well, that's what I was doing. I was working with the unhoused. We had these emergency shelters that Gavin Newsom rolled out where there were hotels, and I think you guys tried to do something similar. You guys, you're in Wisconsin, in New York. I think they tried to do something similar with their vacant hotels.
Yeah,
trying to house the homeless. I don't know how many people actually got in them, but I know from what I followed in New York, people were sleeping in the subway because it was warmer there.
Yes, that's right.
At the beginning of the year, and they like kicked everybody out the subway, and they had to stop running for the first time and cleaned it because people were sleeping on the trains overnight. we don't have that same problem. We don't have 24-hour trains to the same level. We definitely have an issue with it. But housing and building housing is such a huge issue here. And homelessness feels like a business, to be honest with you. Yeah. Like the business of homelessness, and it keeps a lot of people paid.
Well, it's funny. Not funny. Funny and not in a
I know, not a ha-ha way. Yeah,
not in a ha-ha way. There was an article years ago, I believe it was sociologist Herbert Gans, and I think it was called "The Function of Poverty" or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about all the social workers and police and all the different folks whose lives were literally underwritten because of the imperative of controlling the poor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That must be 40 years ago that article appeared.
Think of that article as, I look at it as like doctrine. And sometimes what we do is just triage of the system.
Yeah.
And when these people kind of can get out of it, then you're the success story and everybody pats himself on the back and they make a Disney movie about you.
Yeah, I got the picture. I got you.
But everybody else is kind of like,
right.
We can't fuck with you, so we're going to either put you in prison. Now it's like you can live in these camps. We just don't care. So across from the studio that I was telling you about earlier is one of the biggest encampments in the city of Oakland. It started with like 4 little tiny houses, and the New York Times would come by every so often and write little cute exposés on the architect that built these tiny houses for a couple homeless people. There's over 200 over there. There's so many stolen cars back there. It looks like a lot. It's in fires almost nightly. Wow. It's just anything that you don't want to see. They're not living on the sidewalk. They're living in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
So it's getting worse with COVID because now 30 million people are looking at eviction. So that means there's new people coming every day to the camp in a car or RV. To be homeless, you got to fill out forms, insane forms, paperwork. You got to answer about 100 questions to be homeless. And there was a gentleman I was trying to get into the camp.
While you're quieting your dog, I'll just say somebody just wrote on the chat, somebody argues that intellectuals also benefit from poverty because it gives them something to study. I can tell you at least most progressive intellectuals I know would love to be liberated from that particular subject for what it's worth, okay?
Oh, man. Yeah. Because it gives them something to study. My son
I'm sure they would rather study gambling addiction in Las Vegas than that.
My son wants to see you.
Hey.
He's a fan.
What's his name?
Phoenix.
Phoenix. How do you spell Phoenix?
Regular like the city.
Okay, it's not like the F-E-N-I-X.
No.
P-H-O-E-N-I.
No, he's just like the city in Arizona. Can you say hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. You're heavy.
What's he got in his hand? A truck?
He's got a truck. He's been carrying around 2 trucks. Everywhere he goes, he has 2 trucks. If I don't have one truck...
2 trucks are better than one, man.
That's what he told me. And if I don't have 2 trucks in his hand, then he looks at me like, Daddy, you ain't nothing.
Can I show him my toy?
Uh-oh, Phoenix. What do you mean? Look what he's got. What is that? What is that? A car?
Going.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Mustang. Yeah.
Is that a 69?
Yeah.
You want the car?
Cow.
That's in Green Bay. Tell him, say, I want that car.
Now Tell your daddy to buy you that car.
You got him mesmerized now by the car. All right, young man. No, he listens to you talk on the in the car.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If we go somewhere, I'll put something on. So he listens to you. He definitely stops whenever he hears Amy Goodman's voice.
Oh,
pretty funny.
Yeah. He's an aspiring intellectual. Watch out.
I hope, man. Either that, or he's gonna be Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. I hope you didn't mean that affectionately. God, I hope you didn't.
No.
Oh my God.
Well, because I thought it was funny that Buttigieg and was it Kamala Harris's parents were like Marxist professors.
Well, Pete Buttigieg's father, I didn't know him personally, but he and I were part of a sort of network of people because we both had an interest in the Italian Marxist Gramsci. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oh, he's yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is he loud? Okay. Can you hear him?
I love the sound of kids. It's okay.
Well, he's in a good mood.
Let's see. Well, of course, if you get distracted, I can always see if there's questions on the chat that somebody might have.
There were some questions on the chat. Yes, I'm trying to get to them. Someone had asked a question earlier about the 13th Amendment.
Yeah, 13th Amendment ended slavery.
And then they said that it just switched to another.
There were variations on slavery after that, but debt bondage and slavery were different, and the debt bondage was never on the scale, never ever on the scale of slavery. So by no means did the end of Reconstruction, it was a decidedly disastrous kind of experience for too many African Americans, and by the way, poor whites in the South. A lot of people don't realize, and I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for anyone else or for anyone else, but when they passed laws that made it difficult for African Americans to vote in the South, they actually, ironically, for the poor whites who might have voted for their own representatives, they actually were also outlawing the possibility of poor whites voting.
Like white farmers especially too, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Poor white farmers, you bet. In places like Tennessee and elsewhere, it's quite possible. I just have the numbers in my head that as a number, there were more whites disenfranchised as a number than blacks, but I could be wrong.
Torrey Reed has that in his book, Towards Freedom.
Right. Thank you. I wrote about this. His book is more recent, but mine was some years ago where I've already forgotten the numbers. But yeah,
he's coming on the show as well.
Fantastic. He and his dad Adolf and I are going to do something in December together.
I'm trying to get Torrey and Cedric Johnson on a live stream like this, and just have
that'd be cool.
All the black people on the left in one live stream, all three of us.
A segregated crew. You mean?
A separate but equal.
No, probably separate but superior if you get
those guys are super. Yeah. I'm excited. I'm very excited about what we're trying to do with that. I did want to ask you though about, because we talked a little bit about hope, and you wrote a book in, was it 2018? It's a series of essays. Or was that 2019?
That's 2019. It came out.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in fact a year ago, just about now.
It came out.
It's this one. Take hold of our history. Make America radical again.
My mom wants to know what are your thoughts about reparations, American descendants?
That's a tough question, and I will tell you. I will tell you that I have serious reservations about reparations. Not for the reason that African Americans should not receive reparations. More for the case, and I said, by the way, so I have a very dear friend who I'm mentoring on a project, and her name is Maria Chappelle Nadal. Have you heard of her?
Yes.
She's in St. Louis area, and she was a state legislator and senator, and Ferguson was in her district. And she said to me over coffee one time, she said, so what do you think about reparations? And I said, I know people get pissed off when I say this, but I don't support them. And she said, why? I said, but you really, and I said this jokingly, but then the more serious explanation is associated. Well, how many people are going to finally claim to be black? How many white people are going to try to have that one drop of blood in that old line, Ask
the natives how that's working out for them when it comes to people coming up on being Native American.
Yeah. But I do think, here's what I would say, okay? A. Philip Randolph, one of my heroes, okay? Black labor and civil rights leader, the man who headed up the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who was the original visionary and organizer of the March on Washington movement that did not occur in 1941. because of the fact that he persuaded FDR to sign an executive order to desegregate the defense industries and so on. A. Philip Randolph gave a speech in 1926. You're still with me, Jason?
I'm
right?
listening. I'm listening.
Okay. You're so intent. You almost look like you were frozen. I wanted to make
No,
sure.
no. I'm enjoying this.
So A. Philip Randolph in 1926, which was the 150th anniversary of American independence. Yeah. It was a big, huge gathering, tens of thousands of people. And he said, African Americans, blacks, he probably used the word Negroes at the time, but anyhow, say African Americans or blacks, were the ones who brought democracy to the South in Reconstruction. Okay? And in the way that they brought political democracy to the South during Reconstruction, perhaps in the 20th century, he was saying we, but we will bring economic citizenship to America. And what he meant by that is that if you're going to be an empowered citizen, you have to be economically empowered.
Yes.
And he was arguing fundamentally for basically economic equality. And here's what I mean by that. And this begins in many ways during the New Deal. So I would say, following A. Philip Randolph, who by the way, in the 1960s was the one who actually did
the March on Washington.
The March on Washington with Bayard Rustin
for jobs and freedom.
Organizer, and March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And Walter Reuther, the head of the UAW, was the man who helped to underwrite getting the 250,000 people to D.C. Okay, and whereas the March on Washington, had it occurred in 1941, would have been African Americans only. That's what you said a moment ago is what led me to remember this. But in 1963, was 250,000 of African Americans and lack of a better way of putting it, white folks. Okay, so after the March on Washington for jobs and freedom, the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act are pushed, and then Randolph turned to that question of economic citizenship, and he produces I was going to try to find for the audience my copy of there it is. This is the original copy, A Freedom Budget for All Americans.
He just happened to have that handy because we didn't talk about what we were going to talk about too much on this show. So that's pretty awesome.
No, well, understand.
That's pretty awesome.
I keep handy the most important things, Thomas Paine's Common Sense, A. Philip Randolph's this. I could find other things perhaps. But yeah, and what he does in here, standing on the shoulders in some ways of Franklin Roosevelt's call for four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Randolph, budgeting our resources, 1965 to 75, to achieve freedom from want. He called for, the number's not going to sound as big today as it did in the 60s, a $10 billion budget to transform urban life in America and guarantee everyone, white and black and Latino, a job, and literally end poverty, period. And it was sort of a step beyond the war on poverty, which did not talk about creating jobs that provided educational things. But Randolph envisioned this economic citizenship, this empowerment, not only of the right to organize and the right to vote and so on, but literally the capacity, as FDR once said, quoting a figure from the past, necessitous men are not free men. Needy people are not free people. So the trick would, for me, not the trick, the idea would be to say we're going to not only abolish slavery, we will outlaw the minimum wage in favor of a living wage.
A living wage, yeah.
Okay, so to me, that's the way I would do it, and I don't deny the warranting of reparations, but I think there are ways to do it that are not only maybe even more effective, but also maybe even politically more engaging, because poor white Americans would also be given economic citizenship.
And I think I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So I always this is the first person who's ever really put me on the spot on that question, but I have to be honest. But I mean it's great, and I've hesitated to speak publicly about it because I know that on the left everyone's keen on the idea of reparations. But
I've waffled on it. I wasn't a big fan growing up, and then I've read Ta-Nehisi Coates's case for reparations, and it really had me thinking a little different. And then I read Towards Freedom, which really kind of put it more into perspective for me. That it's a picture. I think when we think of the past, we think of it kind of through, I call it the Mississippi burning lens.
Yeah.
Like when we go back and revisit the past injustices, it's always like real heavy-handed clan violence. Not to say that stuff doesn't exist, but
no, Jesus, yes, you bet it exists.
I mean, I
lived in Louisiana for 3 years after the Civil Rights Act.
I was there in the 2000s, and it's still there. Definitely not to the after Civil Rights Act level, but I don't think we understand how it affected poor white farmers. And Torrey Reed to me really kind of showed, okay, look, it definitely affected us.
Yeah,
but it also
and what we're
them.
getting at is the fact that there's it's all undeniable, and we should never forget that. But if we're going to transform America, then what we really do is we really do need to. I come out of the Marxian tradition. The question of class is even if I may not be as clearly a Marxist as I was in the past, we're living these 45 years of class war, but we don't have to narrowly define it to some kind of economic variable alone. It's also this political and cultural forms that it takes. And one of the beauties, I think, of Adolf, let's put it this way. I've thought this way for a long time, and Adolf Reed and I have only become connected really since Michael's death, Michael Brooks' passing, because we shared this friendship with Michael, and we've been in touch. Torrey, I actually had contact with earlier, but it is the case that I'm no longer alone in my arguments about this, at least, and which helps, I think.
It's a deeper conversation, and what really was pissing me off, and to bring it back to the election and even Bernie Sanders, was that the conversation went from, here's all these wonderful reforms that are definitely going to help not just everyone, but it's definitely going to help my people. Let's look at student debt. Who suffers from student debt at a rate not like white students, black students? And you want to relieve that student debt? We're going to come up. You want a housing program? We're going to come up. And if you were to ask cats, well, what do you want? They're going to say, get rid of my debt and get me some property. And when that's your kind of sort of your platform, and then it started to get switched where it's like, well, you're not for reparations. And then all these black radio show hosts was like, well, Bernie Sanders isn't for reparations. He ain't for black people. And I'm like, word? Like, you didn't ask that to Barack Obama? I don't ever remember anybody asking Barack Obama what he was for reparations.
I can't remember.
Because nobody did. Bill Clinton's lily white ass, who had no problems putting to death that mentally ill man, no problems. Popped his collar as he did it, no problems. Playing saxophone on Arsenio Hall, like the goddamn Pied Piper of the inner city. He had so many black votes. And look at what we got with him. And he didn't promise a third of the shit that Bernie Sanders has been talking about since he was a hippie ass mayor of Vermont.
You can imagine I was a supporter of Bernie going all the way back to the 80s. But I have to tell you, Bernie made some unfortunate mistakes along the way. Some of them utterly trivial, and one of them I think really big. utterly trivial one is, since we're talking about the student debt question, is, when he gave his first talk about explaining democratic socialism back in 2015,
Mhm.
he gave it at Georgetown University,
Mhm.
one of the most expensive universities in the country to attend. And then he gave, in fact, I even remember, I'm sure it was that occasion where a student stood up, a young black woman, and said, well, wait, you're talking about, free public higher education. What about us who are in private universities? And I thought to myself, how's Bernie going to get out of that one? Right?
Mhm.
I mean, why didn't his advisor say, look, you've got to speak at a public university, whether it's the University of Maryland or Towson State up in Baltimore area, or
Mhm.
the University of Michigan out in the Midwest, whatever. Do this at a public university. Don't go to a private. And then he made the same mistake in 2019 or 20, whenever he appeared at George Washington University, literally just down the street from Georgetown in D.C. And George Washington is another one of the most expensive universities in the country. And I thought, what are these people doing? Don't they understand? I mean, he could have even gone home to Vermont and done it at the University of Vermont, perhaps. Okay, those are trivial, perhaps, but just a sign of poor advice. The other thing was, as much as Bernie's website and program this time around did reflect a commitment to reviving the greatest aspirations and projects of the New Deal of FDR, he never really, when he appeared in public on the debate stage with the likes of the guy we just referred to, Pete Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris, and Amy
Elizabeth
Klobuchar,
Warren, yeah.
and who are those guys? Oh yeah, Biden, for example. I mean, Tom Steyer. and so
Text
on.
Joe 330.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. So why didn't Bernie do what Eugene Debs did when he was defending himself in court back in 1918 against charges of sedition, when he stood there and said that he stood in a tradition that included, and he calls into the courtroom phenomenal figures of the American radical and progressive tradition. He calls into the courtroom to stand alongside him in the imagination, Thomas Paine and Abraham Lincoln and figures like that. And you could have imagined if Bernie calls into the room Franklin Roosevelt when they turned on Bernie to say, oh, we can't do Medicare for all, we can't afford that kind of thing. And Bernie could have said, you're Democrats? What kind of Democrats would reject the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt? Roosevelt created Social Security when everyone said we can't afford it. And if FDR had had his way and had not been blocked by Republicans and white supremacists, you would have had Medicare for all, national health care back in the 1930s. But Bernie didn't do that in that occasion. But it would have been an opportunity to educate Americans, or better yet, remind Americans of the American progressive tradition and the American dream that was not just a fantasy, but actually something pursued by the greatest president of the 20th century.
Do you think, I got a couple quick ones before I get to the people's questions. Do you think that it's almost inherent that an OG like Bernie plays defense sometimes? Like watching the debates in 2015, 2016, to me was very different than watching them in this last 2020 cycle.
It's funny you say that, because in one sense, he didn't go after Hillary then.
No.
And he didn't go
really
after Biden or anyone else, really. I mean, he tried to a bit in that last debate, but he just blew it. I mean, but I saw the similarities between 2015 and 2019-20. And the similarities were that Bernie, after he gave the speeches at Georgetown and George Washington in those 2 different years, which conjures up the memory, brings forth the FDR tradition that he embraces, he dropped it again. And whenever he got onto the debate stage, as I was saying, he had this he felt this need to say, Scandinavia, look what they do in Denmark, or look what they do in Sweden. Americans will not be impressed by the fact that things go on differently in other countries. They won't. But what if he had said, America's greatest moments have been moments in which we have created a country in which more people enjoy the good things the necessary things than they ever did before. And then recalls the tradition. Look, it was Thomas Paine in the 1790s who first outlined Social Security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Abraham Lincoln signed into law the Land Grant Act, which gave states resources to create state universities so that students could essentially get free public higher education. I mean, we have this tradition of what I call social democracy, comes all the way through to FDR, and then comes into the 60s by way of Martin Luther King Jr., Lyndon Johnson, and others, Michael Harrington, the writer. It's there. And all he has to do is remind Americans of these things and remind Americans, I always get a kick out of the fact when I speak, I'll say to people, by the way, because people who turn out for talks are usually older. And I'll say to people, how many of you are on Social Security, right? And a number of the hands go up. And I said, and Medicare, and the hands go up, that kind of stuff. And I say, why don't we have Medicare for all? It's that kind of thing. And most of the people in that audience agree because they realize how liberating it is.
Yeah.
And Bernie should have spoken to the American people, not to his fellow. Who cared who was on the debate stage with him? He should have just looked out at the American people and said, aren't you fed up? I mean, don't you want what FDR wanted? That kind of stuff. So I think
what we miss out is I had this gentleman on the show that wrote. I don't know if you've ever watched the Star Wars movies. I don't know if that's your bag.
I saw the first Star Wars movie the first year when it came out back in 77.
77. That's the year I was born.
Yeah, right.
So I had a gentleman that wrote a book about Star Wars from a left perspective, and it's called Welcome to Rebellion. It's 0 books.
Ah,
the publisher.
I should look at that.
Dr. Michael Harris. I'll send you the link to the show.
Great.
And he says we kind of don't have these grand narratives on the left that the right has. And he gave you.
That's what I've been on a campaign for the last.
He gave kind of reasons why we don't, from an intellectual standpoint. But he's like, we kind of need these grand narratives on the left, and I feel that Trump ran on it. Well, it's not even just Trump. Whenever you see these elections, these guys kind of have a story and they stick with it. And maybe because Bernie's from a tradition of, I'm not about the story, I'm about the facts, and I'm going to hit you with these facts, and this is what it is. Like, that's cool and all, but people want to get behind a narrative.
Yes. Okay. So we started this conversation around that question, really. I'm telling you that the left generally turned its back on American history, on the narrative of America that we should have been cultivating. Okay. And so the narrative that goes from Thomas Paine to Frederick Douglass to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, I'm using individuals I could talk about in terms of movements, the free thinkers, the abolitionists, the slaves who rebel in the South, the labor unionists who are organizing from the time of the working men's parties of the 1830s all the way through to the 1860s. I mean, there's this history. I mean, in every generation, there's a progressive movement, you might say. Okay, so let me go to this point about the narrative. So what happened is sometime after the Vietnam War, the left was like embarrassed about American history, slavery, racism, sexism, and that's all true. But the other thing about it is that we don't have the slavery, we don't have the denial of rights on the scale that we had in the past. Why don't we? It's not because people got enlightened, all right, the powers that be. It's because folks struggled to demand radical changes. And as I said before, there were times in which not only did they struggle for it, but in the face of real crises, we somehow found it in ourselves to truly carry out revolutionary changes. So the question of Bernie not developing the narrative, that, by the way, I've been on the warpath in some ways about this ever since Bernie lost in 2015, to Hillary. I'm not saying he could have won, but what Bernie failed to do was cultivate a narrative that we could have then used more effectively when he ran again in 2020. In other words, people need to remember that cultivating a narrative, you don't do it for the sake of one campaign. You cultivate a narrative to build a movement.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernie, who knew if Bernie would run the next time around? But the point is, he was in a position to cultivate the narrative. and that's what he didn't do. And I can tell you, I've been in DSA for many years, and I'm not very active nowadays, but I was in the past quite active. I used to write for DSA, and I remember the first DSA conference or convention I went to in DC. It was fascinating to hear people speak, and I remember I spoke, and I said, at one point, I said, what I'm failing to hear in our gathering is any sense of history. We're talking about the current moment. We're not talking about the shoulders that we stand upon. We're not talking about who empowers us out of the past. Mm-hmm. But they didn't pick up on it. So what am I going to do?
No, it's frustrating. In the book, to your point about a narrative, and I didn't really realize this till I read this book. I kind of knew a little bit about it. I don't know if you know who Shahid Buttar is. He's running against Nancy Pelosi.
I actually, to be honest, I have worked with Shahid and some stuff.
Okay, so Shahid's been on the show a couple times.
Yeah, I've sat in on meetings of his campaign. So
he's my guy. That's my dude.
Yeah, and Shahid had reached out to me to talk about these things, and I'm a little disappointed he hasn't picked. I actually told Shahid, I'll tell you this, let people in Oakland hear this. Maybe Shahid will pick up on this by word of mouth. Because I haven't been in touch with their campaign for some weeks. I said to him, and I meant this, that he could outdo Pelosi. He could outdo Pelosi, not simply from the left, but he could literally accuse her of abandoning the FDR tradition and turning her back on the legacy of the greatest generation.
Yeah.
He could do that. In other words, everyone knows he can come after her from the left. I mean, God, it's obvious. I mean, my God, she's a centrist Democrat, too often a neoliberal. She has clearly outworn her welcome as Speaker of the House, as far as I'm concerned. But it is the case that he could have gone where no one else had gone and said, standing on the American progressive tradition, wrapping himself in the like, as Debs did, in the likes of FDR and others, and said, you are no longer a real Democrat. That's, to me, what he could have done. And
now, let me ask you this question. I asked this last week on a show, and people were kind of stumped. So the conversation is always like, what if Biden wins? What if Biden wins? What if Trump wins? What if Biden wins? Whoa. For me, as a black dude, I don't feel that much of a difference because I don't think Reagan was a great choice.
Wait, I'm going to tell you something. I will tell you something. I'm going to disagree with you. Finish up. I'm going to disagree.
I'm looking at, I asked this question. I said, what if Trump wins, but Pelosi loses, McConnell loses, and Graham loses?
In other words, the Democrats take the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
But Trump is still the president.
Yeah,
somebody else asked me about
that.
And
Barbara Lee becomes Speaker of the House.
Oh, well, now we're talking. Look, Barbara Lee should have been the vice presidential candidate right now. Failing that, there was, Bass of California too, and there are others. But here, okay. So what if? Well, the first thing, you can be assured if that happens that he will get seriously impeached and thrown out. This time he's out. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I can also tell you, were you on the verge of saying that if Biden wins, it doesn't matter? You weren't really saying that. I'm going to tell you. Let me put it to you this way. Okay. I'm voting for Biden.
Yeah.
I made a major statement. I wrote a major statement after Bernie withdrew about why it was imperative to vote for Biden. As I put it then, Biden was deplorable, but Trump is utterly despicable. Fucking despicable. Okay. And to me, there's a distinction there. Okay. But here's the other thing. If the movements that we would engage in, that we would want to see advance, if they're going to make a difference, you don't want Trump in the White House. You want a Democrat in the White House. That's the key. Whoever the Democrat is, you want a Democrat.
I'll tell you what my concern is. My concern is, this is just my concern.
I bet it's mine too. Go ahead.
My concern is that whatever you get, if Biden wins, I see a lot of people, and let me preface this by saying this: I believe in my soul, Donald Trump is done. I think COVID was his Herbert Hoover bonus March movement, and you
From
can't
your
get over
mouth
that.
to God's ears.
You can't get over it. That's what I think. This is my belief.
Yeah.
I am not a historian or professor. I've read some stuff.
No, right now the question would be yes. By
and I
every
believe that.
historical term, in historical terms, there's no way he could win. Right?
I don't see 200,000. I retweet your tweets every day when you put the
number.
COVID number up, because you can't stand on 200,000 dead bodies and say MAGA. So even if people see 25 angry MFers saying stupid stuff on Fox News, that's not the nation.
Yeah.
So I think whatever you get in 4 years of Biden, if cats go back to brunch, if there's a collective sigh, what you're going to get is going to have an ideology.
Okay, hold on.
Okay, I'm done.
Let's go back to the Black Lives Matter movement and the diversity we witness of young people. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's. I think that's still mobilizable after January, and I think that's the key. And I sure as hell, I'm in Green Bay. I don't hear the news from all these different cities, but I sure as hell hope that energy has not dissipated. That they're ready to move. That's one. Two. There's been a lot of insurgent strikes, wildcat strikes, and other things around the country. That's imperative. And there's a new generation of labor leaders coming up. I think 2021, all the more maybe if Biden wins, as opposed to merely out in the streets and protest, there's a greater chance of serious political action because of what we've seen this past year, especially if indeed if a relatively safe vaccine emerges and people are truly able to gather it together in solidarity.
That's another thing. Like again, my fear is that whatever happens during the Biden administration, because Biden, for a lot of people, you follow politics and you know Joe Biden. If you know Joe Biden from Barack Obama, then you think those two coached Little League Baseball and that was his assistant coach. You don't really understand Joe Biden. Go watch that Anita Hill documentary.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm not saying you. I'm not saying you as in
Yeah.
Professor Kaye. I know you know Biden. But
did I ever tell you? Have you ever? Well, you and I have the first time we're talking about. Have you ever seen me remark about the fact that when I did like Joe Biden?
When did you like Joe Biden?
Was it when he ran for president? Was it
1988?
Yeah. Wait. No.
When he lied?
No. Hold on. Wait. Hold on. Yeah. This is a joke. Okay.
Okay.
That's when he plagiarized his speeches.
You know did he get one of yours? Yeah, that was the whole thing. Why he dropped out.
Plagiarized me. He plagiarized the leader of the British Labour Party, Neil Kinnock. Okay, Democratic Socialist, Neil Kinnock. And I thought to myself, well, at least Biden's plagiarizing someone I like. Okay, that was my feeling. So I thought, he's not a bad guy. He plagiarizes a leftist.
Do you remember what he was saying during the 2016 election when Bernie was running? When he was
probably suppressed the memory.
When he was chilling at the house and he was just Joe Biden chilling at the house, not running for shit. He was like, you know what? I think people are all about Medicare for all. Bernie's the man. He was on some pro Bernie shit.
Well, Kamala Harris was too.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Ultimately, I'm with you. I'm with you. I want the same hope. This is just my pessimism. I'm just speaking it out loud. My pessimism of people getting very complacent, because what I see is like this complacency, and then it's a slogan. Like Colin Kaepernick had a serious protest with the NFL. You and I were talking about our disagreements with the NFL. That's one of my big issues with the NFL, the way they handled that.
Yeah,
I
was outraged that the Packers did not line up in solidarity with the black players, and but I can tell you one thing is interesting. to go back to something we were talking about earlier, I did a tweet. I'll have to send it to you. I've got it somewhere. I saved it somewhere. I tweeted that as a co-owner of the Green Bay Packers, my support for the taking the knee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that went viral.
Word.
Because most people didn't know that being a co-owner meant that I was one of, 100,000
all the guys
people. They thought I was truly a co-owner. In fact, even the Canadian Broadcasting Company contacted me to interview. I mean, it was just an amazing kind of thing. But seriously speaking, I mean, what they did to him and what they did to black players at the time, the fact that the NFL, I mean, they're all at best, the owners, the very best of the owners is probably a, centrist neoliberal, if not a right winger. But the fact is that what they did, I mean,
it's evil. And then to come back and go, oh, well, we're going to put in racism and we're going to have lift every voice, like whatever.
Yeah, right. On the end zones, yeah.
It's in the NBA to me is equally as bad, where I'm going to put the names of these people on my thing and
oh yeah, right,
on my jersey. And that's my fear with Biden, because a lot of people that I saw that were really behind Bernie, they believed in a movement, are voting out of the fear of Trump. And there's a relief.
I won't deny there will be many a Democrat who will tell us to give Biden time.
He needs another 4 years.
Okay.
Right?
Right. But it's also the case. Look, the left is not the left of the past. There is a newer, younger left.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and I have to say that one of the things that strikes me about the newer, younger left is also their interest in laying claim to American history, which I think is telling of their desire to be making history. So, maybe you know what? I mean, I want to thank you. This conversation has grabbed hold of my hope again. Okay. I just have this feeling that, by the way, somebody said here, Kamala was the worst choice. Okay. Well, Biden was the worst choice compared to Bernie. It should have been Bernie with, somebody like,
I would have loved to see Barbara Lee. Yeah. I know people said they're too
old.
But
here's what, yes, you need a youth. But here's something.
Do you?
I have what?
Do you really need youth?
Well, somebody, yeah. I mean, yeah. Otherwise, they could both die, and you want to be prepared. In fact, it was funny. People kept saying, "Well," people said, "What about Biden and Warren?" And my wife actually said, "She's too old. She's too old. You got to have somebody younger, really young, progressive." But this is something that I keep thinking. Kamala Harris, the one thing you can't deny about her is she is clearly ambitious and opportunistic. Therefore, if she has any sense of how to make sure she becomes the presidential nominee next time, she's going to be she might well be pushing stuff that Biden himself would not, because I can assure you that there's no way that the next go around, no way that a Biden-like candidate will get the nomination.
It's going to be,
there is a Democratic Party.
It's going to be Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, 2024. You heard it here first.
And by the way, I like you a lot, but you're crazy. There's no way. We don't even need a Californian necessarily. But if you're going to have a Californian, I could think of other people, but I'm not going to name.
No, I'm not even saying it because he's the governor of California. I'm not a fan of Gavin Newsom. I'm just saying it because
the ambitions run. I mean, I know that
he's so wannabe Kennedy. He's got the political legacy behind him. Kamala will have 4 years in office from the anti-Trump administration. God knows
the next candidate will be someone with who it could be a Californian. Don't get me wrong. Could easily be a Californian. But it's going to have to be someone younger, more promising, and decidedly progressive. Somebody with a record of real progressive action. And California right now, there's just Gavin Newsom will be taken out, I think, because of too much. Not, I mean, physically. I mean, I just don't see that. So what kind of? Okay, so I'm reading the.
Yeah,
This is great.
that's my mom. My mom's a DSA member too, by the way.
Is your mom Pamela Davis?
That's my mom.
Oh, hello, mom.
She's a union she's a badass. She flies
Good.
all over organizing and
Really? Who's she
yeah.
organized for? Do you know?
Ask her.
What's your union, Pamela?
I know she was doing stuff for Fight for 15.
Oh yeah, I tried my best to. By the way, there's a guy. Do you know Joe Sandberg from L.A.?
Mm-mm.
So he's trying to lead the campaign for Fight for 25. The Fight for 15 is already late.
Hella late.
And if indeed, based on what would be when the minimum wage was raised to what is it, 7.25, whatever the hell it is.
Yeah.
We should be 22.50 today based on productivity in the American economy.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe is pushing every day. Watch my Twitter feed.
I think I saw something about him. I know
Every day
Richard...
I grab hold of his, I retweet his tweet, and I say something about FDR or whatever to sort of bolster it. Now, Joe Sandberg, he heads up something called workingpeople.org or workinghero.org. That's it.
My mom, I know that. She says she works for UFR and Walmart workers.
Chris Small?
Chris Smalls, I interviewed
Amazon.
before I talked to you. Before I talked to you, I had an interview with Chris Smalls.
Oh, great!
Right before
cool.
I talked to you, so that's going to air pretty soon.
Yeah. He and I've talked to him through third parties, but I don't know if we've ever.
Patrick Jones says, "I don't think Biden will encourage white militias to shoot BLM protesters." I agree.
Yeah, right. Look. There's a big difference between neoliberalism and fascism. That's the key.
How about a story about a Russian dictator who attacked us on 9/11 to help Trump come to power? And this guy's name, I don't know what that is. Vladimir Gluten. What?
Gluten-free. We'll be Putin-free.
I pay taxes for a rep.
She organized Walmart workers. Yeah. By the way, I can honestly say, if it matters to your mom at all, I have never shopped in Walmart, if it matters at all. But then am I fair to the Walmart workers by not shopping there? I never know.
I mean, we're complicated people, man.
Yeah.
We are complicated people.
Yeah.
She also says we were in awe of our first black president, I think, in regards to Obama.
Right.
There's a lot of truth to that. I actually lived with a white family that was not my own. That's actually Republicans. And I remember me and the mom sitting there watching the when he won, and she even cried because she said the first black president, and she did not want him to win. So I get that.
Yeah, I knew a lot of people who told me they said, I don't care what he accomplishes. We need an African American president. We need a black president. But I can tell you, I always thought to myself, people just say, "Well, you think we'll ever have a Jewish president?" And I'd say to them, "I don't know if I want a Jewish president." Said,
you don't want Jon Stewart as president?
No, definitely not Jon Stewart. I am not a fan of Jon Stewart. I thought the Daily Show with Jon Stewart was awful. I thought it was abysmal. It was literally, no, it was just terrible. I'm not a fan of Jon Stewart. Nope.
I know how to get under your skin
also,
now, boy.
I will tell you, people I know who've worked for him, that he talks one way and then he opposed unionization of his own crew.
That's what Tyler Perry did. Everybody wanted to tout him as Negro of the Year because he opened this big ass studio in Atlanta, and the first thing he did was make it non-union.
Yeah.
The Ivy League is corrupt, coming from a former Northwestern student. He says, how important will elite academia be in pushing left-wing change? Do you agree with Chris Hedges with that?
Well, I went to all state universities. I went to Rutgers. I went to public university over in England, and then I went to LSU. So I'm not a proponent. I don't see. Look, a friend of mine, David Feldman. You know David Feldman?
Yeah.
David. You just have to mention Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and he loses it. Though I will tell you, one of my daughters went Harvard. But it is the case. You want change. That's one advantage Biden has in my heart, and that is, as he says, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I went to a state university.
Did you see the whole thing on, was it CNN or MSNBC, where Biden made some comment about this is Park Avenue versus Scranton or some shit
No,
like
it's
that?
Scranton versus Park. You're right. He's Scranton versus Park Avenue.
Park Avenue, and the lady was like, "I live near Park Avenue. Why is he making this about elites?"
That was Stephanie Rule on MSNBC. Yeah, I definitely responded to that. I was really amazed.
She's the worst, and there's a really good interview.
She is the worst. Well, she's intimate with some hedge fund billionaire that she hangs out with.
Big surprise.
Yeah.
Anand Girdadas was on her show, and she tried to take him to task, and he very politely kind of took her down. And I appreciate him for that.
Good. So actually, I don't know what Chris Hedges' argument is about elite universities, because I don't know Chris Hedges very well.
Oh, you guys aren't homies? It's not like a golf tournament you guys have every...
No. No, sorry. He's too pessimistic for my...
He's not a happy man.
No, he's just too pessimistic.
I can only imagine what Thanksgiving dinner is like at the Hedges household with that man. My mom...
Well, instead of going around the table asking people what they're thankful for, he says to people, "How long do you think we have?"
Is this what you're going to do? You're going to eat turkey?
I do like turkey. I do like turkey. I love turkey. It's actually it may well be my favorite dish, in fact.
Thanks. So okay. I was going to say something about Thanksgiving at the Kaye house. My mom says universal basic income, baby bonds. I think we're talking about.
Okay. My reservations about universal basic income is this. Okay. First of all, I believe in a federal job guarantee at a living wage. And I mean a living wage. By the way, FDR in 1933, when he signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, which included a minimum wage, he said no company should be allowed to operate in the United States that does not pay a living wage. That was what he really wanted to see. Now, universal basic income, the problem is that the amount they were talking about was so small that the landlords would have eaten it up before you could even have gotten to the bank.
I agree.
Okay. The baby bonds idea is a good idea. That's something to be entertained. I mean, these are all things we should be debating, and so I don't oppose them outright. Universal basic income, I have reservations about. But I, for example, would like to see. I don't understand why Biden, even if he's going to oppose Medicare for all, which, by the way, makes me know he's deplorable. I don't see why he doesn't find it in himself at the debate next Tuesday night to surprise everyone, just as he surprised people when he said he was going to have a woman vice presidential running mate. Why doesn't he stand up there and say, "We've suffered the pandemic for 8 months. We know how much Americans have lost in this, their health care coverage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The time has come to enact universal health care in the United States." And he said, "And if you don't think we can afford it, we must at least begin with Medicare for all kids. No one under the age of 18 should be without health care." I mean, I'd like to see him do that. And if Trump tries to go after him, I'd like him to use the F word. I think he needs to be censored on TV, because that'll prove to Americans he's really a human being.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
I mean,
I agree. I think, again, this is just my opinion, my lay-ass opinion. I think Donald Trump is totally terrified because he knows he done fucked up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I agree with you on that.
And when you fuck up that big, you start doing, and when you're a guy like that with that much ego that can't sit there with a little bit of like humility and be like, "Oh, my bad. Let me try to fix this." It's a lot of finger pointing and crazy blaming, and it's like everything that could go wrong for that man to expose him is what he was, what everyone said in the run up to it. I mean, let's keep in mind, he was in the middle of a lawsuit with his bogus university when he was winning the presidency. So this, it's not even a house of cards. It was a house of bullshit.
It's hard to believe he won the presidency. And I know he didn't win the popular vote. Look, I'm in Wisconsin. It shows you just how angry working people in Wisconsin were. Not only white working people, but black working people. Okay, with that they couldn't bring themselves to vote for Hillary. That's how angry they were, that they
Hillary,
were willing to vote for.
she was the worst candidate. If they wanted to run Elizabeth Warren, 2016 was the year to run Elizabeth Warren.
No, 2016 was the year to run Bernie. He would have won.
Oh, no, I
like
agree.
that.
I agree.
Like that.
No, I'm with you. I'm part of that. I'm on the train with you.
Yeah.
I'm saying
okay.
if they didn't want Bernie, right? If they're scared of Bernie, I don't remember who said it. And someone said, I think that the Democratic Party is more frightened of the left than they are of the Republican Party. Was it you?
Sorry. Your mom is telling me. I asked my son to let me be on his show. He said no.
She a lie.
So she's thanking me for coming on tonight. Yeah, I would like to. Next time, if you have me back, I want your mom on.
I'll bring my mom. She's full of it because I have asked her, and she's like, I don't want to go on your show. My mom is just mean and difficult, but she's a very sweet woman.
She's mean and difficult.
I love her to death. I give her a hug.
Great, I can tell already.
No, she's badass.
Matt, you call me. You can call me Professor Kaye or Harvey, and I much prefer Harvey. Do not call me Mr. Kaye. It makes me sound old. Ever since I began teaching at 26, I used to tell my students in the universities, never Mr. Kaye. You want to be my friend? It's Harvey. And it just always that way.
Professor Kaye is okay, right?
No, but yeah, you can call me Professor, but
Okay.
you can call me Harvey. Seriously, I'm not trying to be cool. Just that's
okay.
Who I am,
I'm just
Harvey.
saying that Sunday comes. If we're gonna be homies like this, Sunday comes. We talk a lot of shit during Sunday. Just be ready for that shit talk.
Well, I don't mind. I mean,
it's fun. It's not like mean. It's
Yeah.
fun. But we're gonna
no, absolutely.
You finna have fun now. Like you're in the fun
right.
gang.
I want to see what your mom's saying next.
Boomer power.
Boomer power.
No, she was yelling at me about that. She goes, you had Chris Smalls on, and and she, she likes the kid, of course, but she was like, you need to have a boomer on your show. I'm like, Mom, I had Noam Chomsky's daughter on.
Oh yeah, he's old. He's old enough to be my father, right?
And she was just kind of looked at me and shrugged her shoulders, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I can't please your ass then.
You had Noam Chomsky's daughter on?
Yeah, Viva.
I don't know much about her.
She wrote a book. She wrote 2 books on immigration. And
right.
And we did a whole show on immigration, and that was a show that my connection didn't work. So luckily, I had a series of questions to ask.
Yeah,
and the connection was bad, so all I heard was Abbott, and then, so I was like, oh shit, and yeah. That it wasn't a very long show, put it that way.
That's too bad. You could probably get Noam Chomsky on, but that might seem intimidating.
Nah, dude, is just there's a reason why I wanted you on, and it wasn't because you have hella Twitter followers. It was because I think you're very interesting, and I like the way you talk because it's very relatable.
Oh, well, thanks.
I love Noam Chomsky a lot. I watched those old school debates on PBS that he had.
Yeah,
but there's something about this show was supposed to be kind of like when we first started it. We said we wanted to have a nuanced barbershop conversation because I felt like that was a way that we could really organize people on the left.
Right. That's a good way of putting it. Right.
And if I have a bunch of smart people doing smart people talking about theory, then I'm alienating all these other people that are fed up and pissed off and don't know why. So
that's funny. I got to tell you, do you know Highland's Bunker? It's this podcast, it must be about your age. Out of Wilmington, Delaware, as a matter of fact.
I know that city well.
Okay, and is there like a Highlands neighborhood or anyhow some kind of wealthy area? I mean, so
I didn't see any wealthy areas when I was in Wilmington.
Oh, okay, so they've got this radical, podcast they do.
Mm-hmm.
Great guys, and they call Highlands Bunker, and they do a lot of Delaware politicians of the left and liberal type. But every so often they bring on someone like me, and I've done the show twice. And the first time we were down to earth. This last time, it was the funniest thing. He got me into talking about theory, which I rarely do. Okay, and I promise you, I'll never do here. So.
I tried to get Richard Wolff on, and his assistant got back, and I just wasn't They were like, just try back later. And I was like, I get it.
Oh, you know what? I for years at my university I ran 33 years I ran a speaker series with a very limited budget. In the early days, it was often when people didn't quite know who I was yet. I would call, and if somebody would say to me, "Well, no," they would have somebody answer the phone. It would turn out to be an assistant. I thought, oh,
yeah,
I don't deal with assistants. This is bullshit.
That's how I kind of feel. Like if I ever get an assistant, it's like, oh, they're not going to come on. Gerald Horn actually had an assistant, but he came on the show.
Oh, nice.
Which kind of shocked me. We talked shit for a little bit.
So you've done like 65 shows already, 66, 65?
This is, yeah, I've done quite a few. And then we used to do bonus content for like another hour.
Wow.
Not so much now.
Well, we're approaching my double.
Okay, I know you got.
No, it says it's 9:49. When do we start? Like
8. So we've been doing this for a minute.
And we never. Are there other questions I didn't get to for people?
None of that Yang UBI nonsense. Take that monthly stipend from the upper half and give the lower half of earners double. It should never be paying for people's boat payments.
I don't own a boat, so I can't. But I will tell you that Mustang toy that I showed you. I do. That's actually the model of my car.
Is that the Shelby?
No, I don't have a Shelby. Oh God,
I'm like, damn. How much is they giving these?
No, I have the what they call the EcoBoost engine, the Turbo 4.
Okay.
So
no, he's getting.
I
don't know what it is.
But I have a brand new one. I will tell you that.
Him and his mom drive hella boring ass cars. I don't know what this kid loves about cars. Maybe it's the movie cars he's getting into. But
my grandson really loved the movie cars. Yeah.
Oh, they love it.
And then he was all the more excited when it turned out that he wasn't even thinking specifically what kind of car it was. But what's the hero of that car?
Lightning McQueen.
Lightning McQueen is a Mustang, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I said, hey, that's the same as, and he got really excited. So I told him, because he's 5 years old, I said, someday that's your car. I told him. So
now you got to keep it in the garage.
It's in the garage in the winter. It's a rear wheel drive. You can't drive rear wheel drive in the winter around up here. So
no, not at all. I've made a mistake of toured out there in the fall, not the winter, but the fall.
Oh yeah.
And I'm from California, so I don't understand snow. It's something I can see in movies, but to drive in, not my bag.
The funniest thing is to be on a flight from anywhere. Well, say from the West, especially, maybe sometime in the summer, and maybe a new recruit for the Packers is on the plane who may have played at UCLA or USC and never experienced cold weather. And one time I was on a flight and there was this young guy, forgetting his name, and he was sitting a couple of rows behind me or just behind me with two like teenagers, like white Green Bay teenagers. And he said to them, so what's the weather like in Green Bay in the winter? It's like and they told him, and he said, you could hear him say to himself, oh my God, I don't even own a coat, you know? Now, the money they pay him, he'd be able to afford many a coat. But it was clear that he had no idea what he was getting into. You know?
No. Winter for me is a very different thing. It's a season where I can wear a light jacket and maybe a hoodie. That's winter for me.
Let me tell you, this is funny. So the 2 times I've really been to California, I've been to California 1, 2, 3 times, maybe 4. One doesn't really count. The one time that I flew to, this is the time I went to the Bay Area, and it was January, like January 5th I was flying, something like that, and it was below zero here. And I got to the Bay Area, it was in the mid 60s, and it was gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And I just thought to myself, what a big country this is. That's all I could think of. What a huge country this is. Then you'll get I'm going to name drop. And you may not know who the name is, but your mom will, if she's still with us.
Oh, she's still there.
Okay. So this was back in 2008. I was contacted by Norman Lear.
Oh, the writer.
TV producer, writer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All the family.
All in the Family.
Jeffersons.
Every major, like half
Archie
a dozen.
Bunker. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff,
Yeah.
right? And still, by the way, still producing for like Netflix. The guy's not, he's the same age as Chomsky, I believe.
Jesus.
Yeah. So Norman contacted me, and we became friends, just so you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so he calls me one time. He goes, "I want you to come out to LA. There's a meeting I want you to be in with me." And it's all on him. He was paying. So I get to the airport that morning, and it was like, again, like 0 degrees. This was February. And this is funny. Can I tell a funny story?
Go for it.
So we're at the airport, and my wife says to me before I'm going to board, she goes, "No blondes, no coke, and no cocaine." This is good, right?
And you're like, well, no sense of me going.
Well, I get to LA, and I'm finally at the airport. It was a roundabout route because the weather was bad. I get to LA, and I'm in the airport. So I had to call Norman's assistant to say, because they were supposed to have somebody pick me up. Who am I looking for? And I was late to arrive in LA. I was missing the meeting. And Marilyn was her name. Marilyn says, it'll be a blonde, a young blonde woman. I said, okay. And this very, very attractive young blonde is there to pick me up. And so we're in the car. She was driving a Volkswagen or something like that. And Norman calls on me on the phone. He says, "Harvey, where the fuck are you?" And I said, "I'm on my way, Norman. So-and-so picked me up at the airport." And then I said to him, "But you don't really expect me to show up on time when you send such an attractive young woman, right?" So he's laughing. So we're getting off, and I'm laughing on the phone. And this young woman says to me, "What's so funny?" And I told her how my wife said no blondes, no coke.
Mm-hmm.
I swear she said to me, "Oh, did you want some coke?"
You were in LA, man.
Yeah, exactly. That was my first of 2 trips to LA. So
I was going to tell you an opposite story of my first time in North Dakota.
Wow.
I went to go work cooking out there in between tours.
Which city were you in?
Williston. I was there.
Whoa.
For the shit.
Williston?
Exactly. Williston is on the northwestern edge. You got to take a state route for a couple hours.
It's the northwestern edge, so you were north of, what is it, Dickinson?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Do you know the oil fields or the Bakken?
Yeah. I don't know it all. I know the oil. My dream for many years was to drive across North Dakota.
Weird.
And I know. Well, I like mountains and all the other kinds of geography. But there is something almost, when I drive down south through Illinois or across Minnesota, flatlands, and I think to myself, and I don't even know if I believe in God, but I sometimes say to myself, God had a purpose in creating these flatlands, and there was something spiritual about them. Okay, where the horizon you can see the horizon way out there. And I just wanted that experience. I owned a really nice car. I had a 3000 GT, a Mitsubishi 3000, and I just wanted to drive across the state. So we
take the 90 across.
Yeah. So we drove across. We drove across North Dakota. We were going to come back across South Dakota. And
that's a better drive.
We stopped in various places, but we stayed actually, I think, 2 nights in Dickinson. And the oil fields that was a jumping area, is what you're talking about.
It was very violent. It was every
like
bad thing you can imagine.
All over again, right?
Man, they said so. I had a show from Cedric Johnson. He told me about this article about a woman that stripped at one of the 2 strip clubs in this little town I was in called Williston, and she was a Marxist. She had a Marxist professor. She had this Marxist critique of stripping in Williston.
Well, the stripper was a Marxist.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, it was, and it's also the episode where, as I'm doing the interview, a rat shot out of my studio, and I screamed and ran out the room.
You said, let's stick to.
I'll get back to the story. To the story.
Yeah, no,
So I
no.
get to North Dakota.
Yeah.
I didn't take a plane because I'm scared to drive. I'm scared to fly. So I took a Greyhound bus from Oakland, California, to Williston, North Dakota. I get off the bus, and there's what's called a whiteout. I don't know what that is.
I know a whiteout. I know what a whiteout is.
They closed
it's not a racist thing. It's just
no. It's a storm like I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And snow was to my knee. I left with a T-shirt, my Vans, and a jean jacket.
Oh my God, that's a nightmare.
And they said you're stuck here in Bismarck, the capital city. I was stuck there for like 3 days, and the snow was so high it was to my knee.
Yeah, Bismarck's an interesting enough place. Once upon a time, North Dakota was a leftish, populist kind of state. They're the only. Once upon a time, they're the only state, I believe, with a state bank.
Yeah, I think they still have one.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were these. They were relatively left. I mean, they had this populist politics, and boy, they moved to the right and set the pace for this upper Midwestern area.
There's sprinkles of it. It's kind of like Vermont, right? There's sprinkles of it.
Oh yeah. Well, Vermont. I remember. It's funny. Back in the early '70s, Playboy magazine ran an article about why progressives should move to Vermont because it would be an easy state to take over. And of course, oddly enough,
Bernie was like this.
I think Bernie read the article, right? Yeah, I think he read the article and headed to Vermont.
Quick question before we both go.
Yeah.
Barry Goldwater runs, and was it 65?
64. Right.
64. Barry Goldwater runs. We get Reagan in 80.
Yeah.
What project did we start on the left? Did we start it in 2016?
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody, it's funny. I've thought about that too. Is Bernie the Barry Goldwater of the left? Right? Did he launch a new politics? Well, I mean, Barry Goldwater is the product of a certain politics, but he essentially brings that new right politics into the mainstream in a national way, as opposed to a Southwestern way. And did Bernie do that? Maybe. It is quite possible. I think if you look across the country, it's maybe not always easy to see, but you've got all these folks running for Congress. You've got a lot of, I'm hoping that I'm not wrong in saying there are probably assembly and Senate seats at the state level that have been contested and are being contested. My dearest friend, his wife, and she's also a dear friend, ran an insurgent campaign against the incumbent here, and she is decidedly a Bernie progressive. And I think she's got what it takes to really become a major figure in the state Democratic Party. So maybe we're seeing the beginnings of a whole new left, if you like, that will, if we can win in November, hopefully you're right about November, and then start building and not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the complacency that too many of the neoliberal Democrats would love to impose upon us.
Brunch-free zone. This is a brunch-free zone.
And also a Jenny's ice cream free zone, probably. Isn't that the name? Isn't that ice cream that Pelosi had in her freezer?
Oh, that's super expensive. I don't know. That's out of my price range, man. Everything about that. When people were talking about, oh, she had this expensive ice cream, I was like, who knows? I don't know.
That was a real sign of how utterly disconnected she was and is. I mean, geez, how do what she have? Double super duper stainless steel. Yep. I mean, that was incredible.
And apparently she was set up. It was a setup. I have inside word that it was a setup.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
By a pro Trump person that took pictures of her with no mask. That was the whole thing. She had no mask.
I'll tell you what, even if it wasn't a setup, she seemed to relish the moment. That's all you need to remember.
Well, I mean, you know who my guy is. I'm out here with Shahid.
I support him.
I have
little monies I've given to candidates, I've included him on my.
I think his election is extremely important. I think getting that one of the most powerful
Extremely
people in
important. I
politics.
think that's absolute. You kidding? If he was to take down in an election Nancy Pelosi, the revolution would have started.
That to me is the shot. That's the shot right there.
Yeah.
That's the shot, in my opinion. And I really felt like the kid Charles Booker would have taken out Mitch McConnell. I really feel that way.
Yeah.
And
and Bernie would have been. We wouldn't be worried as we are now. Well,
No.
you're not as worried as I am, maybe, but
I mean, I'm worried to an extent, but I mean, I gotta trust me.
If you lived in
man.
Wisconsin and you drove from one city to another through fields of Trump signs, you'd know why I'm worried.
Well, shit, man. I was in Wisconsin in 2012 and definitely saw some racist ass cats.
Yeah, well,
You know, my trips through the United States, as much as I like a lot of the scenery that I see,
I understand.
You know,
I do
there's-
understand. I really, really do.
like I love Montana, but I also hate
Yeah.
Montana. You know what I mean?
I know. Yeah, I can readily imagine.
But
Yeah,
I don't want to keep.
I'll leave you with this thought.
Mhm.
So I was in grad school in Louisiana, LSU, 1973 to 76. And during that time, I met a real celebrity named David Duke.
Jesus, don't tell me you had class with David Duke.
He was in the political science graduate program
Don't
on the other
tell
floor.
me you had class with David.
I didn't. I
Duke.
was not in a class with him, but he was being interviewed by one of my fellow grad students, and so I was in history and sociology, and something about he because I didn't have an accent at all, neither Louisiana nor Southern.
Mhm.
When I left, my fellow grad student, who wasn't even really a friend of mine, said to me, "Yeah, after you left the room, he said, is that guy from New York?" Because it was a group of grad students, and he said, "Yeah." He goes, "Is he Jewish?" And the guy he says, "Yeah." He goes, "I could smell it."
Wow. So that shit is real with him. It's not like a game. It's totally real with him.
No, the only thing not real about him is his face.
He had facelifts, huh?
Oh, I'm convinced he's been reconstructed.
He's a weird cat.
Yeah, he started
a
out a
weird
Nazi. He
cat.
started as a Nazi.
I remember when he was on Geraldo and shit. Remember that back in the day?
He started as a Nazi, then he became a Klansman, and then he just became an outright white supremacist Republican. Did he run as a? Yeah, he ran as a Republican.
Mhm.
That's right. Yeah.
Governor of
Okay.
Louisiana, right?
I'm going to let you go. You're going to let me go.
Okay.
Your mother said I know him. Did she mean I know him as in she knows?
She knew Norman Lear. We were talking about Norman Lear.
Very nice. Very nice. Norman's a great guy. Really a great guy.
Tell Norman that we all love the Jeffersons.
I haven't had contact with Norman as I used to. I think he's moved on from me or something like that.
Mr. K. I'm sorry, Professor K.
Thank you for correcting yourself.
Thank you so
We
much.
should
for
do.
taking
We'll
the
do
time.
this again sometime.
I'm down. I'm down.
Yeah.
I hit up David Griscom, who also was on the Michael Brooks show,
Well, he was
And
one
I-
of the producers. Yeah.
and I said, "Do you want to talk shit about football and leftism?" And he said, "Hell yeah." So we got to have
he's out of Texas, of course.
That's how I got to know him, through Twitter and talking shit about football.
Oh, okay. But I want your mom on with me when we're doing this next time, so
Well,
I can ask her.
Mama, did you hear that?
Because I want to ask her questions. Look,
She's a very interesting woman.
well, just so she knows, one of my favorite, in fact, maybe my favorite student ever. When I think about it, not necessarily the best student, but one of my favorite students, a woman named Sierra Spaldings, is an organizer now with the National Nurses United (NNU),
Mm-hmm.
and she's doing me proud. She's organizing, just doing a great job. So if your mom's organizing, then I want to know more.
I'm trying to keep her. Right now, I'm trying to retire her so she can watch this 2-year-old. But she definitely will bounce on my ass like she did. She had to go to New York to organize for something. And she was like, I'm gone for a week. Which, how badass is that?
That's great. Can I brag about one of my daughters?
Yeah, of course.
My daughter, the one who went to Harvard Law School and Harvard and all that,
Mhm.
she works. She's an assistant attorney general of the state of New York.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, and she's on what they call a special. She's part of the special team that was recruited to counter Trump initiatives. So she's part of this team that writes the briefs to go get injunctions against his executive orders or his laws that would cheat workers, limit immigrants, rights, you name it, and they've been winning cases lately. I'm very proud of her.
It's a heavy job.
Yeah,
you should be proud.
Yeah.
And see, if we end on this happy note now, right?
Yeah, see?
Our family's doing good stuff.
That's right.
Generations of good stuff.
Right. That little 2-year-old is fabulous, by the way.
Thank you.
So, fabulous.
He's the
and
future.
By the way, my university, its mascot is the Phoenix.
Ah, so I gotta order some stuff from you then.
And the teams are called the Fighting Phoenix.
I gotta order if you got any
this actually
little
is
kid.
from the university, not from.
Oh, that's from Green Bay. Was it
UWGB? Yeah.
So can I get like a baby jersey, like a 2T baby football jersey from you?
Well, I would say I would go get you one, but I haven't been going on campus right now, so it'll take a while before I get there. Okay, no, so sorry about that.
I'll see if I can order one. I'll see who
my office full of books. I only run in every so often, but I haven't gone into the Union or into the other places.
Because you guys aren't really locked down like we are, right?
Well, other university campuses, some of them have literally. Oh, I'm by the way officially retired from teaching in August because I didn't want to do online teaching. I love the classroom.
Gotcha.
So. I mean, I still have my contacts with my colleagues and I have all these students that I still know, but our university is not really, they're doing variations on most people are doing online teaching with if you can get a big enough room to have social distancing in the classroom, you can do in-class stuff. But I don't go onto campus because, look, put together 20 students and they're not going to socially distance. And I don't want to be around people who've not socially distanced.
No, I feel you. Yeah. No, I totally feel you.
Okay, let's go. Let's say goodbye.
All right.
Okay, one of us has to be self-disciplined.
I'm gonna hang you up.
Okay.
My mom says she likes your daughter already. Bravo.
Great. Good. I like your mom, and I like your son.
You got to see all of them. Maybe I can send my older daughter to your school. She's 22. She needs a good school to go to now. She needs
just for what it's worth, and this sounds like one of those terrible lines, like some of my best friends are black, but I do want you to know. But I do want you to know that I had a really good student who I mentored to go to. So she was like, she gave the speech for her class to the graduation, and she's just started at Howard University Law School. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud of her, and she's on the front page of the UWGB website if you want to.
Oh, I did see that.
Yeah, that's Jada Davis, my student.
Oh, damn. The legacy of Harvey J.K.
Well,
and I need you to autograph this book for me. I'm gonna send it to you. I need you to autograph it for me.
I feel bad that you'd have to send it, but okay.
I can't drive there anymore, so I'm gonna send it to you.
Well, I'll tell you what. So which one do you have?
I just got the not the latest one, the one before, the 18 essays.
Okay, so you've got the speeches and essays.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is next time, if you send that to me, when I return it with the autograph, I'll send you one of my other books with it too. Okay.
Ooh, that's dope. Okay.
Yeah. So just send me a note, and I'll give you the address to send it to.
Okay, I appreciate you. Okay, now I'm gonna hang up so I can advertise my show more.
Okay. Have a good night. I'm ahead of you. I'm gonna go to. I probably won't go to bed soon. This has revved me up a bit. So. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kaye.
Bye-bye. Good night, Pamela.
Have a good night. Everybody, thank you for your comments and participating in another live stream. I told you guys I was trying to do this weekly. I'm going to have another one next week. I don't know exactly who the guest is going to be. There are some shows coming up that I'm really excited about. I did interview Chris Smalls today. That's going to be our 70th show on the podcast. The podcast still airs on Wednesday and Sunday mornings. You can get it on Spotify, Apple, Podbean, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. That show will be there. Definitely YouTube. Also, I think we're going to be doing another thing pretty soon. I've been talking about it with the Left Click. It's a group of leftist filmmakers and animators out of Los Angeles. And we've been talking with another former guest of the show, Professor Ken Hammond, who did a debunking show with us about China. And we're going to do a really cool animated history on the rise of China. And I wish I could like show y'all what the little bit of stuff we have so far, but it's going to be different from this. There's also more patron programming that we're putting together. So if you haven't, you can become a patron for as little as $2. You do get all the bonus content from all the shows. You're going to get bonus shows, and you definitely get merchandise from the band, and then soon merchandise from the show. Please follow us on YouTube. And if you have any ideas for who you'd like to see on the show, as far as past guests, let me know. I am getting a pretty good, if you listen to this conversation with me and Professor Kaye, I have been talking to Torrey Reed Jr. and Cedric Johnson about doing a show closer to the election. And I'm getting kind of fired up about that, but Torrey Reed is going to be on the podcast soon. We got some real good podcast episodes coming up. I had a woman from a group called the Debt Collective recently, and that is debtors unions, and they've actually changed some laws about the way we do student debt. So that was a real good conversation. That show's coming up. So please, if you haven't subscribed to the show, write a review on Apple. Because it started as a music show, it's actually in the music commentary category, and it's in the top 200 last I checked. I get this email update, and we're 13 in Malaysia for music commentary. I can't switch it over for whatever reason. So thank you guys. Have a good night. Here's some more music that my mom doesn't like.